Welcome to the BRAD for Jesus podcast. Today I am here with Sam Moss, who is known on social medias as Sam T. Moss, if I have that correct. And this guy has an awesome podcast, which I highly recommend. Y'all should go check that one out when you're done listening to this, called Youth Group Chronicles, where they read out some hilarious stories of fails, ridiculous moments, and other things in youth ministry, and in general, just have a good time. Sam, welcome to the BRAD for Jesus podcast, man.
Thanks so much for the invite. Honored to be here, and appreciate you bringing me onto the show.
That was the wrong time to take a sip of coffee. Okay.
Well, I left you hanging.
No, that's all right. So, Sam, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Sam Moss?
Yeah, so my name is Sam Moss. As you know, I live in upstate New York. My wife and I have two kids, two little girls under, well, not sure when this will come out, but right now under the age of 2. So life is a little crazy, but
Wait, do you have
her
twins?
and I, no, the one is 2, and then the other one was born a couple months ago.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep. So a 1, almost 2-year-old, and then a newborn. So life is a little crazy, but we're getting it done. And like you mentioned before, I run a podcast called Youth Group Chronicles. I mean, man, if you have really spent any time in ministry, youth ministry, or even if you don't go to church and you're listening to this, I've had people reach out and be like, this is like crazy. I showed this to my unsaved friends and like, this is hilarious to them.
Yeah.
I think like the Christian realm is missing some comedy, and we kind of fit that mold, which I think is really awesome, and it's wholesome for the most part.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to cuss, but there's some ratchet stories on there.
There are.
You know, we keep it saved, but it's there's some crazy things that happen, and it's kind of funny stuff that you just have to laugh at. But outside of that, my wife and I are entrepreneurs, so we both run our own businesses, and
Nice.
that's our life in a nutshell.
Sweet. What are your businesses? What's the nature of those?
So I run a web development company. So we do website redesigns and development for typically like larger tech companies. So we don't really do a lot of work for small businesses, but like the Silicon Valley SaaS startups and stuff like that.
Wow.
And my wife owns a luxury newborn and maternity studio here at a local mall. And so that keeps us pretty busy.
Nice. The baby photography. All right. So you guys must have like the best photos of your own kids, right? Like,
I would say so. Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny. So my wife used to do wedding photography, and she was making a name for herself, doing really well. And then she had our daughter Olive a couple of years ago, and didn't want to be gone every weekend in the summer, and
Right.
for 8, 10 hours, 12 hours on end. So she made a shift and started taking some pictures of babies, and was like, you know what, this is something I could do. And she like went from 0 to 100 skill wise overnight. It was pretty insane. I guess once you kind of
Nice.
like understand photography, I'm not a photographer, so
Yeah.
she did pretty good with that, and that's all she does now. So it's a lot
Nice.
easier on her schedule, and more family time.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I was never that great at taking photos of people. I was a
Same here.
photography major when I first got started in
Oh, no way.
college. And I was never that great at the portrait side of things. I don't know what it was. Like, I'm a pastor. I like being around people. I'm good with people, but the getting the right pose and the right expressions and all of that just never quite worked for me. I was much more felt more qualified at doing sports and landscape stuff. I was really into snowboarding and skateboarding, and so I was like, oh, I'll go and do this, and
Do some
then I
like
wasn't
cool
that good at
action
that
shots,
either.
right?
Yeah. So that was more my jam, and then the call to ministry sort of derailed that whole plan. And,
Hey, I've heard it happen a lot, and that's totally cool.
yeah. So what's your connection to the church now? Because you have this youth group Chronicles podcast. So obviously there's some youth ministry connections there, and you've got oftentimes people from your church as guests or fellow other youth pastors and whatnot. And so many hilarious people. Like, I'm like, dude, I want to know these people. They're so good.
Or not.
Or
No, I'm just
not.
playing. They're all good people. They're fun to be around. I'll just say that.
Yeah. So what's your connection and role? How do you currently connect or serve with the church?
So right now in ministry, I am on our worship team, and that is pretty much what I do for ministry right now. So I play lead guitar at my church, and as for like ministry experience, I've been in ministry since I was like 8. So I got a job playing drums when I was
Nice.
8. My parents lived at a Christian camp growing up. Uh, I think we moved there when I was like probably 6 or 7.
Oh
So they
wow.
were full-time ministry my whole life. And grew up in the church, which is really cool. And then served in youth ministry, probably 3 or 4 years up
Mhm.
until we had our first daughter. And then it was solely focusing on the worship side of things,
Mhm.
and the music side of things. And then also I do live production for a conference that our church puts on. So I'm on the planning team for a youth
Nice.
conference that we put on. So I do still dabble a bit in the youth ministry side
Super
of
cool.
things, but it's more laid back. Because people are just like, "Oh, are you a youth pastor?" I'm like, "No, never was a youth pastor. I was a leader, and have had a lot of exposure to it and experience with it." But
Mhm.
man, youth pastors. The one thing I've learned about this podcast is you all are like way underpaid. I'll just say that right now.
Yeah,
The
it's not
stuff
the
you have to
most.
deal with.
Yeah, I know some of that stuff. It's like there's not enough money to make that moment worth it.
No, you have to be called, man. You have to be absolutely
Yeah,
called.
absolutely. And that, I mean, there's so much, all the good youth ministry stuff out there at some point comes back to just really solidify that calling, write it down in like 80 different places. Cause there will be days where you were just like, really, why am I doing this? And then,
Yeah.
oh, the calling. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Jesus said so. I guess I got to keep it up. But yeah, I was in youth ministry for 20 years and, it, it has its moments.
Yes.
But
Listen
it's
to
also
Youth Group
hilarious.
Chronicles, and you'll realize that you might not have it so bad.
For
That's
sure.
something I've realized is people will reach out and they're like, "Dang, like my kids are angels." Compared to what I'm hearing on this show. And it's like really
Dude.
encouraging to me because I thought they were like the worst. I'm like, no, like nothing
Yeah.
surprises me anymore as I'm reading these stories.
Yeah.
So I can imagine someone listening to the show. It's like, oh, okay, whew, we're doing all right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's that way with a lot of things, though, because, I mean, with youth ministry for sure, I think networking and getting to know other youth ministers and being part of some of the Facebook groups and that kind of thing, as that was like really blown up huge, really helped me find some common ground and whatnot, especially when I moved from being a like really involved volunteer to like being in
Mhm.
charge of it. And then it was like, oh man, I don't have somebody to go to and be like, hey, this just happened. You deal with it. Now it's
you're
like,
the
oh
you're
man,
the guy now.
I'm the guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now people are coming to me with that stuff. I'm like, wait, what? And finding other youth pastors that had been through things. But I mean, I went through that all again shortly after because my first job in youth ministry, our kids were born. I have twins, and they were born like 6 months into it. And I remember like, feeling like I am the worst parent alive. Like I have no idea
Mhm.
what I'm doing. How are these things supposed to survive me? Like
Yeah.
I don't know why God would let this happen to them. That I would be their dad. I'm so inept and unqualified to keep them alive. And finding things like ridiculous dad stories on Twitter and whatnot. I go,
It helps,
oh,
right?
okay, that wasn't that bad. All right, like when the
Yeah.
baby had a blowout diaper on us, like in public, where we had nowhere to go,
That's
like
nothing.
we're
That's
hours
normal.
away. Yeah,
I'd be
everyone's
concerned if
like,
that didn't
yeah, that
happen at this
happens.
point.
Right, exactly. So, so you grew up in church,
Mhm.
and you grew up at a Christian camp. How long did you guys
Yeah.
live there growing up?
So we moved there in 2005. So I was 7 or 8.
Twenty
And
aught five.
yeah, 2005. Um, 2005. And then I got married in 2016 and moved an hour north to upstate New York. So the campus in PA. And my parents lived there for another year and then actually launched a ministry in the city that I'm in now,
Oh, wow.
which they help the homeless and mothers, single
Oh, that's
mothers
super
and,
cool.
and stuff like that. So the camp probably 15 years for me, roughly.
Wow. So
Yeah,
you lived there
13,
until you
15.
like got married and
Yeah.
moved away?
Yeah.
Wow.
Don't recommend. I recommend, I don't to all the people that aren't married yet.
That's funny.
One of you, preferably both of you, should live on your own, not together, people. That's not what I'm saying. Live on your own and take the bachelor life away from the parents for a little bit. Thankfully, it
Right.
was an okay adjustment for me. But my wife spent 6 months living in an apartment, and kind of figured things out and lived on our own for a little bit. So I don't recommend going straight from mom and dad's house to marriage, but you know, it happens.
Right. That's
I got married young though, so I guess that has something to do with it.
yeah, for sure. That I don't know, man. You know, in a way, you could make the case that it was a little more biblical, maybe. You know,
Yeah, you're right.
Should have built an addition on your
was a lot
parents'
cheaper.
house.
I'll say that.
Right.
Financially, yeah, way less of a burden.
Yeah. So in that time, what would you say is the biggest moment where growing up around the church, you know, I'm sure it's kind of one of those like, well, I don't know. I mean, I was birthed in a pew and I was raised, you know, so I was baptized at that moment and, you know, loved Jesus ever since. But when would you say that God did something radically different in your heart where you knew like, okay, I'm here for Jesus, and that's, you know, I am a Christian, and Jesus is my Lord and Savior.
Yeah, I think for people in the church that have grown up in the church, it's probably hard for them to be like, no, this is the day. But for me, I don't know the exact date, but I remember the moment. I got saved when I was about 6 years old, in my bunk beds. My parents were just talking about it. I'm like, you know, I want that. Like, this is mine now, and have not walked away since that. There's not been a time in my life where I'm like, you know, took a sideways path. It's been, you know what, following the Lord since then, which I think is a testimony itself. And yeah, it's not like this out on the mountaintop crazy experience. It was something really simple, but I do have
That's
that
awesome.
moment that I can remember, which I think is really important.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. So what do you remember what it was? Because you said your parents were talking about it one night and you were like, yeah, I want that. Like, what about it seemed like, yeah, that's the thing?
You know, I think the biggest thing was like I saw my parents living it. And again, I was pretty
Mm,
young. Thankfully, I've been able to
yeah,
hold on to it and realize that was a moment. But I think the biggest thing was like, oh, I want this for myself. I see my parents living out this Christian life, and now it's time for me to make the decision of yes, I want the Lord in my heart. I think that's what I remember the most is like, yeah, Jesus is going to be in my heart. As simple as that sounds, as a little kid, and that's what I really grabbed onto and took for myself. And
that's
the cool
awesome.
thing is we've been able to live it out ever since.
Yeah, that's super cool, man. I love hearing that kind of stuff. Being a, you know, like I didn't get saved till I was 21, so it
Mm-hmm.
took me a long time getting into it. And I was going to church for a couple years, sort of figuring it out, and spent a long time kind of claiming, but not really there, and didn't really get it. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like, yeah, I'm into Jesus, but also like everything else. Um, and then to raise my kids, you know, like they were literally born into, you know, my
Yeah,
ministry.
it's different,
Like
right?
the
Yeah,
first people who watched my kids were youth kids and youth leaders that I had.
it
So
sounds all too familiar.
yeah, so it's very different experience from what I had growing up. And then it's like, man, I knew a lot of really crazy PKs. I hope that my kids turn out to actually just love Jesus and not be crazy rebellious party
Mm-hmm.
animals who, you know, everyone's like, oh no, not them. You know, so
Well, for your
so far
sake,
so good.
there are a lot of PKs that I know that are serving the Lord. For example, at our
Mm,
church, there are our pastor has three kids. Uh, one of them is a campus pastor. One of them
mm,
was formerly the youth pastor, now is more of like an associate pastor. And then the
nice.
other one, she's not a pastor, but she works in admin in the church. All are serving the Lord, so you have nothing to worry about.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hope so. You know, so, so you do, doing web design with tech startups and that kind of thing, Silicon Valley, like not Christian stuff. Like I was, when you
Mm.
were like, yeah, we do web design and, you know, usually for bigger, and I was waiting to hear like mega churches, you know, like I'll run Clover sites or whatever, you know, like a Christian web design company, but it's not, that's not what you said. And so I'm curious how that, being in a world that's not directly connected to the church, even stuff, let's be honest, even stuff that is directly connected to the church,
Mm-hmm.
you encounter a lot of stuff where people don't act like they know Jesus. But
Yeah.
like in Silicon Valley, tech startups, like secular industry, I know there are Christians and stuff, but at the same time, there are values and things that tend to elevate themselves in life that
Mm-hmm.
have nothing to do with Jesus or a real Christian worldview. So, my question after all of that setup is, what's the where do you see the biggest like divergence between like here's where I find myself being different or countercultural or called to some way different way of handling stuff because of Jesus, that like if it wasn't for Jesus I'd be going, you know, this way, but following Christ calls me to be different from a lot of the people around me or the general pull of the industry around me?
I would say immediately what comes to the top of my mind is the language that I use.
Yeah.
So I don't cuss, I don't swear, and that is immediately noticed by people in the professional world because they kind of start to realize like, oh, there's something different. So in the professional world, it's like I also run a podcast there, and they'll come on the show, and if they want to cuss, like that's cool, right? And that's if they're gonna do that, that is okay with me. I'm not gonna be like, hey, don't do that. They're not
Right.
saved. They don't know any different.
Yeah.
But they do notice that I don't respond to it and be like, oh yeah, F that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
None of that. The same thing growing up as I noticed, like when I was playing sports for the high school, it was, all the kids, they would call me the team priest. So they would like, they'd want me to pray before a game or whatever. And they noticed like they would try to get me to cuss in fun. You know what I mean? And it's just like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. And then they would respect that. And I think that's the biggest thing and the easiest thing that a Christian can do is just control their mouth and just be like, if you tell someone that you're a Christian, like they should know by the way that you're talking, that is 100% true. Even now when I go to the gym, man, it's like a cesspool when it comes to that kind of crap. But like you keep your head straight forward and you talk, you have good character and people notice. And that's the most relevant one is, even at a gym with people I don't know, they'll never hear me say anything like that. I think that's the biggest thing for me is, and really the easiest for people to be like, oh, there's something different because it's so prevalent right now. And I think it's something really important.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. I think, as I think about it too, and even just hearing what you're saying, I think it's so much more than just not and maybe, agree or disagree. But it would seem like it's not just the language itself, but it's the content of the speech as well. Right. I mean, it's the fact that you're, talking and it's like at the gym, like it's not just like, oh, you didn't just say like, dang, that girl looks, or whatever. It's like you avoided that whole topic and changed the subject or like hit something different. Like there's an entire just category that's just not engaged there of the way you talk, the words you say
just rise
to
above
things.
The conversation. And it's not, a lot of people are just like, I hope this doesn't offend you. They catch on. And the first thing they'll say is like, I hope this doesn't offend you that I cuss. And I'm like, look, I am like one of the most thick-skinned guys. You can say whatever you want to my face, around me. I really don't care. Like you're not going to offend me. Nice. And it's, they can do what they want, but they start to actually take it for themselves. Is what I've noticed is like the more you hang out with these people in a class or whatever it is, or professionally, it's really interesting the influence that you can have.
Right.
And the thing is, they're gonna catch on that you go to church, you're a Christian, right?
Right.
And they're looking for you to trip up. They might not set a trap, but they're like watching, right?
Yeah.
And they're gonna use any excuse they can to disqualify you and Christianity as a whole.
Right.
So if they hear you talking about X, or you slip up and you cuss, or you put yourself in a bad situation, they're always watching, and then it's what a fraud. See, Christians
exactly. Yeah, man, I had that. I messed that up so bad when early on in my faith, and I mean, all things are forgivable, but at the same time, I think it was a really, I think it was a huge fail. I was, I had been into drinking and everything when I was younger, and then I quit and followed Jesus and was like, no, not at all, and then kind of was doing a like, well, not really, but then once in a while, but nothing crazy. And I usage of alcohol as a Christian, debatable. I find that in moderation, there's grounds or allowance for it, but aside from that, at this time I was saying like, absolutely not, I don't do any of that stuff, because I'd been around it, and I was working at a skate shop at the time that was like in a downtown area where like, it's like a couple of stores and lots of bars and lots of, like it's all walking across the street and everything. So like people just everywhere stumbling around drunk every night. And all the guys I worked with trying to get me to come out every night. And I'm like, finally, man, I think I should go out with these guys because like, they don't think I'm that cool. Like I want to be cool, and they're going to give up on trying to hang out with me. Like they're trying to hang out with me. I should go, and I go out and I get trashed, and then the next day show up at work and one of the guys is like, I knew it. I knew you were full of crap and the whole thing was just BS. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, wow, I screwed that up so bad.
Yeah.
Like it was so much better. And that's when I realized like exactly what you were saying, that like that it might even seem like a trap at times.
Yeah.
Like they were totally baiting me to see if I would fail. But what they were looking for was not hoping I would fail. There was so much disappointment in that guy. Like it was this huge letdown because he was like, oh, I was hoping there was actually something different.
Yeah.
I was hoping that there was something different from what I live out. And I realized, no, you're just exactly the same as me. No difference. And I mean, I didn't do the same kinds of thing. I wasn't doing everything that they were doing, but
it's crazy how
it was
one
enough.
one incident is all they need. And it can be something as simple as gossip. One thing I've noticed, and I'm really intentional about, is just step away from the conversations that involve others that really they shouldn't be happening, right?
Yeah.
And my pastor says it really well. He's like, if someone's coming to you with gossip, it's because they're looking to like throw up on you, and you're just there with a garbage can to catch it. So walk away. Like, become the person that like they would never come to you. Obviously, they're coming to you for a reason. So it might happen once or twice, but walk away. And it's, again, at the gym, it's like, everybody talks about everybody when someone walks out the door, and I've made it like really clear. I've even been kind of blunt because I've gotten to know a few people. I'm just like, you guys talk about me like this when I walk out the door?
Yeah.
Just to kind of like, be like, oh crap, we are kind of being like jerks about this.
Yeah.
And like, I don't mean to be like better than them, but that's like something that can really show up if you're just talking trash about someone behind their back. That's another thing they're going to nitpick and be like, yeah, you know what? Just like us.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that, and I mean, and that one in particular is, something that like biblically it's mentioned multiple times in ways that, establish pretty clearly that it's a big deal. But then even more the way that it does tear people down and to avoid it and to stay out of it shows that you are about something different and something better and here for the kinds of things that you want to be able to claim about following Jesus, right? Like, no, I'm here for, spreading light and bringing people up and, coming alongside like Jesus and lifting people up from stuff, not looking for extra ways to tear them down and rip them down. So speaking of that, spill the tea on all the guys that you've been on. No, just,
you wouldn't believe what,
I know. What's Isaiah really like? No, he's one of the guys that shows up on your Youth Group Chronicles podcast.
I will say, hey, the people that we bring on the show are personal friends of mine. They go to our church, and I will say the character of every single person on the show is incredible. I think that's something that's really cool. And like we read some crazy stories. Like I said, we don't cuss on the show. We're not terrible. There are just some stories that might be a little inappropriate for some, but like as youth pastors and adults, it's like, dang, that actually, I could totally see that happening. It's funny to laugh at. Yeah. But the character of the people on the show, second to none. And Isaiah, for example, absolutely hilarious. Super fun guy to be around. So it's really cool, the opportunity that I have.
Right. Yeah. It's one of my favorite things on there I've noticed a bit lately. I feel like there were 3 or 4 different episodes where it's like you almost need like another segment, like Sam's learning a new word. Because some of these stories, like bringing up stuff, you're like, I didn't know what a brothel was. Like, what?
Yeah, I had to look it up. Seriously, as I'm like doing these stories, there are legitimate times I will copy and paste a word into like Google. Either that or Urban Dictionary, and just be like, how do I pronounce this, or what was actually supposed to be funny here? And I'm like, oh yeah. So that's another thing. I grew up 100% homeschooled, and definitely had some access to the world for sure with sports and stuff, but overall pretty sheltered. So it's funny now to be like, I don't know what a brothel is. Sorry.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I live in Nevada, so we're the one place.
Pretty common, right? Okay.
Yeah, like there's literally they advertise on the radio here, on public radio. It's insane.
Oh my goodness! Wow,
like
that's crazy.
Is that legal? That shouldn't be legal. My kids are in the car. What are you doing? Like, this is not okay. But dude, so what are so I'm curious. So you were involved in youth ministry. You have another tech podcast, you said, or something about that industry. Yeah. So what got you started? How did you find yourself like, you know what? These are so crazy. We should read these stories out or get a podcast going. Like, how did that come together?
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of different things that happened. The first one is I'm good friends with our youth pastor, or well, he's now the associate pastor, Pastor Cody, and there was just stories that he had said in passing that I thought were hilarious. He's just like, yeah, there's these kids that brought like, I know this youth pastor, they set off fireworks in the church bus and like held up like help me signs, and I'm like, that's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more out there. And then from there, I was just like, I had seen on TikTok some it was like podcasts or channels where they would basically just read off stories, and the vibe of those was one of them I thought was pretty interesting was like true crime. So they would read like old crime stories and just like conversational, kind of like we do our podcast. So I loved that format of the content's already created, because it's a lot of work to create content and get all the information for a show, as running your own podcast. Another one I saw was they would like read crazy relationship stories. This is all like worldly secular podcasts, but it was they were like, am I the jerk for doing this to my girlfriend? And then people would comment, and I thought the format was genius and people ate it up.
Right.
So fast forward, I was sitting in my parents' living room with a couple friends, and I was like, man, someone needs to do a youth ministry podcast about like just reading crazy stories.
Just fails.
Just fails, crazy stories, whatever it may be. I'm sure there's got to be like forums and chat threads of all these kind of things, because I only had a couple off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, there's really no excuse. Like, I know what I'm doing when it comes to a podcast. Maybe I should try this. So I was like, you know what? I really think this is a cool idea. There's really nothing like it. Especially even really in like the Christian space. I haven't seen this pulled off. So I'm like, this could really go somewhere. So I set it all up, started a little podcast. Pastor Cody added me to a couple of youth pastor groups.
Nice.
And I just started searching the threads, and I'm like, or Facebook groups. And I started searching the posts in there, and I stumbled across some threads that had maybe 150, 300 comments, something crazy. Just started pulling the stories and telling people, hey, like, I want to put you on our show with the story. Like, here's the link. And people started eating it up. So from there, it snowballed. People email us stories. We have hundreds of stories that people have emailed in. I'm in quite a few Facebook groups now, so I'll post every once in a while and just say, hey, what's your craziest youth ministry fail, or what's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened? That's a new segment that's going to be coming out here on some future episodes. I think I framed it. What's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you while serving in youth ministry?
Yeah. Not to get my stories elevated, but I did comment on that.
Did you? Okay.
Yeah.
So you saw that one coming. Actually, you know what? Yes, I do remember your story. It's going to get featured because I laughed so hard. Was it the paintball one?
Yeah.
Okay, dude, that was freaking hilarious.
Dude, like you have, so you gotta, I'm gonna tease just a little bit of it so that we can talk about it, but I'll leave it to people. Go check out the Youth Group Chronicles podcast, and at some point
you'll be hearing it soon. Yeah, one
it's
of these
worth listening to. Regardless, like
just for that story.
We were on a road trip, and my kids, like, I just put that on because we lost reception. We were going over mountains, and I was like, dang, man, like, I don't want to just listen to the same. We've had the same worship CD in our car, this one CD for like 6 months. So I'm like, okay, we need something else. So I plugged in the podcast, and I'm like, what podcast do I listen to that my kids can hear because they're in 7th grade? And so I was like, oh, the Youth Group Chronicles podcast. This is perfect. And so I put that on. Awesome. And I mean, we were dying. They were like, are there more? And I'm like, I think we listened to every episode already. Like,
that's hilarious. And, there's more to come, guys. Don't worry.
But so it is totally worth it. Go binge that entire show. But a few years back, at middle school camp, they had a paintball course, and one of our boys wore cargo shorts and and apparently baggy boxers too, and was crouched down, like looking to. And one of my leaders came around, and he's like a little too aggro, one of those guys who's like kind of out to hurt the kids, when you're playing the games. Excuse me. And he comes around, he shoots the kid, and the kid just drops to the ground. And he was like, oh, he didn't put his gun up, so he like walked around and like shot him in the back, like put a line of paint up his back. Oh, and we're like, what were you thinking? This kid's like, 12 years old. Like, why? that aside, but the kid passed out because he reaches up, the paintball didn't pop. And so he reaches in and thinks it's something else like loose. And he's like, oh, and was done. And then the number of times, like I have done a lot of hospital visits with kids. Like I've been around youth ministry a lot. And we had a big youth group at my last church. And I had a lot of ER visits and various things that I had to deal with. And I mean, I had kid break an arm and get bit by a spider and like, worried about death and like all this craziness. And this time I go to the hospital, like it never occurred to me how many times I have to like mark down what the injury was and all of that and what the result was. And to hear like the doctor, like I'm standing on the other side of the curtain and the doctor's like checking this kid out because he was in so much pain, and he talked to his mom and she's like, yeah, you better take him. And she's like trying not to laugh. She's like, I feel bad, but also like, this is ridiculous.
This is freaking hilarious.
Yeah. And to hear the doctor go, well, that's a paintball welt, all right. Never thought I'd see one right there. That's impressive.
That's hilarious. Dude, when I read that, dude, I lost it. That has to be one of my favorite ones. Not trying to gas you up. Seriously, that one is like, what are the chances of that actually happening? Like
literally a 1 in a million shot.
But then the fact that the kid passed out because he thought something like detached down there brings it to a whole nother level.
Dude, and I actually had this is on a not funny thing, but like, because a couple of my guys were like, dude, that is the most ridiculous. Like, why would you even think that? I'm like, well, one, you're 12 and you reach in your shorts. What are you going to think? But also,
you're in a lot of pain.
Yeah,
you just got shot down there. Like,
right. But like, no, I have a friend who was, he used to ride BMX, like pro, like big jumps and tours and stuff. And he landed on his handlebars once and did like tear things open. And so he's like, no, that's possible.
It's possible.
Like I've heard I know a guy who had that personal story himself. And so I'm like, no, I mean, there's a big difference between a paintball and a bike handle, but still like that was brutal.
Honestly, the pain that he felt, he probably thought that's what happened. So,
yeah.
Hey, I probably would have thought the same thing.
Dude, I got my stuff blown to bits. Like, oh my gosh. Oh man, that was so good. But they did add a sign to that paintball course that says must wear pants.
That's one thing I think is hilarious about youth ministry is like, we now have like basically created random rules and no one knows why, but there's a story behind every single one. Like there's stories now that I'm sure there's a sign in the church van that says, do not wave at random people. No crayons and paper allowed in the van. Like, and then 10 years from now, it's like, why do we have this rule? Well, Johnny did.
Yeah. And that kind of stuff
you have to wear pants on the paintball course. Why?
Yeah. And without taking, without keeping the story that connected to it, you have no idea why. It's like I was watching.
It's the weirdest.
I was watching a thing where they were talking about like, this lady grew up like cutting the edge off like a ham or something, like cut the end off it every time. And she's like, why do finally your husband's like, why do you do that? Like that's such a weird, you're just wasting like a pound of meat off the end of this thing. I don't know. Calls mom, why do we do this? I don't know. Your grandma always did it. Like calls grandma, why do we do this? I don't know. My mom always did it. Call great grandma, why do we do this? Well, when I was, a young lady, the stoves were smaller. The oven was smaller. And so that was the only way the whole thing fit. You had to cut the end off it so it would squeeze into the oven.
And now everyone's doing it for no reason.
Yeah, now everyone's doing it for no reason. It's like, oh, you got to like pass on the why. Otherwise, like you just end up with stupid traditions. But
exactly.
And knowing that some people, especially like this generation seems like to be the one who's always going to reject those things, and be like, well, I'm not doing that. That's idiotic. Yeah. And so like, I always tried to keep like, this is why we do this thing because we had a kid go to the ER. This is why we do this thing because we had a kid. And so like when I got hired at a previous church, they had left a kid. One of the youth pastors had left a kid. And I know you've had multiple stories like this on your podcast. The guy had left a kid in another state.
Yes,
they were crossing state lines.
Too common.
Stop at a truck stop. Everybody gets off the bus. It's a big tour bus. Everybody gets off they have multiple buses. I mean, there's a big youth ministry. So, like 3-4 buses, all caravanning, and like 52 people on each bus. And one kid out of 200 got left behind at the truck stop. because everybody on the buses did a head count. And then when they came up with the discrepancy, either two of the leaders counted again and said, no, I think we're good, and left, or they went, I'm pretty sure he's on the other bus. And
don't do that.
all of that kind of stuff. So we were like, here's the thing. You get a roster. These are the people. You call roll. Every time you get on and off that bus, you call roll. We do not leave until everyone confirms that every kid on whose name is on the list is on the bus. Nobody switches buses at all for any reason. Where you're on the same bus, you will survive the trip. But we're not leaving people at the wrong place and turning a whole caravan of buses around to go pick you up because you didn't bother to come out of the bathroom on time. So yeah, it was... but like every time until I shared that story, the rule made no sense. And people were like, no, I don't know. I counted. And I'm like, no. The bus doesn't move. Go do roll call, man.
So here's a story that's going to be coming on the show at some point. This one is very unique, but also ties into that. There was a youth group, and this is why it's important to do roll call at the church or where you're leaving as well, even if you have the list.
Yeah.
They were running like Six Flags or something for they did it was an event that went until midnight at the theme park sort of thing. So they went with like a bunch of kids on a bus. They had the clipboard of all the names so that they could do roll call when they left.
Yeah.
Turns out they still can't figure out who did this, but someone put a fake name on the chart to be funny. And they spent 3 hours. This is midnight that this started because they're doing roll call at midnight when they're about to go home. 2 or 3 hours at the park with the cops and the security trying to find this random kid that no one actually knew. They thought it was a guest. And they're just like, I guess we just have to leave. And no parent has ever called about that kid. No one. And also no one has fessed up like, oh, that was me. But that's also a reason why you want to make sure that everyone gets on the bus the first time too.
Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine, dude. Like, because there comes a time where it's like, okay, there's no explanation for this. We have no... But then even that, it's like, what's the policy that got missed there when you look at like, you're responsible for kids. Like, I will never forget like the weight of being a youth pastor and what it meant for parents to trust me with their kids when I was getting ready to take a bunch of kids to another country. And I think it was when, I'm trying to remember which trip. I don't know that it matters, but we were either headed to Africa or Ecuador, one of those. And we're getting ready for the trip, and the dad of one of our students like writes me this letter, and he's just like, man, I was, Marine sniper, like all this kind of stuff. Like, and I have been under enemy fire. I have all of this stuff. And like when people, shoot at you, like you have all this crazy stuff coming your way. And, it's like knowing that people have your back and knowing what you're out there to protect while you're putting up with this. And so like part of his letter was about just the idea of, some of the like human attacks that come from just everybody criticizing the leaders of anything all the time. And spiritual attack. And then the rest of it was about like, like I'm trusting you to be like the CEO of this company to take my kids behind enemy lines and do all this stuff. And like, and he's like, I really like, I wouldn't trust anybody else, but like, I trust you. I've seen your character. I've seen the way you handle yourself. And I was like, dang, dude, like this is a big responsibility. Like
I better not lose this kid.
Yeah. There's like a soul and like a family and a history and a legacy attached to this person's life. It's not just like, oh yeah, whatever. So like we had a lot of stuff. We've got permission slips and everything else. And like, I've done Six Flags trips and things like permission slips and parental contact and emergency contact info. And like, how do you just have a random name on the roster that you don't like have any other info for? Like,
I wondered that
nobody
too.
ever asked about this or anything. Like, what rinky dink youth group setup do you have where you're just like taking anybody that put their name on a piece of paper? Like, you can't take kids with you. Oh my gosh. So anyway, that blows my mind. Like some of those things I just think, and I've had interns and leaders before where they would do stuff like that. Just like, oh, I just grabbed the keys to one of the church vans and like piled my small group in the van tonight. And we drove to Sonic and had youth group over there. And I'm like, hold up, you what? Like, what if something happened and the mom shows up and I roll in and no one's in the classroom?
Uh-huh.
where you guys are
Yeah.
supposed to be having small groups. Like, what, are you kidding me? Like, you just left? Like, who's with you? I don't know. Just
Yeah.
everybody from the group is in the. What if somebody showed up late and I just sent them off to wander the campus by themselves
Yeah.
in the dark because I thought you guys were here? Like, what were you thinking?
Some something that's one of the things that it wasn't like anything bad happened, thankfully, but something I ran into here is culturally the city I'm in, parental, how do I frame this? Supervision is really not a thing. So
Yeah.
it's like you go to the kid's house and they're like, yeah, my mom said I'm fine. And then like you come to their house or they come to your house for small group, and like I'm really intentional about like, hey, like we have parents' permission, like they
Yeah.
know who I am, I meet them all. And this is when I was doing youth ministry, and it's like they'll go from there and then they'll just be like, yeah, I'm just gonna walk to my friend's house a mile away. I'm just like, no, 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 like you can't do that. Like we're going to your house, I'm dropping you off. And like honestly, what's crazy is the parents, not all of them, it's just the it's not inner city here, but it's a small city. The city here, it's like they would have been fine, they wouldn't have cared. Like
Right.
they was like, yeah, they come home 10 o'clock. Like, yeah, they were at my house till 8. Who knows what they did until then? And it's like you actually like, even if the parents don't care, that will come back to bite you one day if you're
Yeah.
not careful.
Yeah. And unfortunately, like you said, like every weird rule has some legitimate happenstance
Mm-hmm.
behind it where it's like, we need to make sure that doesn't happen again because there's massive liability. And it's like, yeah, 20 out of 21 parents don't care, but it's that
Yeah.
21st one that ends
That'll
your
be the kid you
career in
lose.
ministry. Yeah, that'll be the kid you lose, or
That's I've heard that story
that'll be the
a
kid that
lot.
goes missing. Like, and dude,
Yes.
like, I mean, I had, like personal experience of like a girl I grew up going to school with, um, was kidnapped on the way to the bus stop, like in view
Oh,
of her parents. Like her parents saw the car pick her up.
that's
Like the
crazy.
house is looking at the bus stop, and she was
Uh-huh.
taken. She was found. Like, I mean, I'm kind of old. This was in the '90s, early '90s, and I was in like fifth grade,
Mm-hmm.
and she was found like a few years ago.
Wow.
Like
That's
she
crazy.
walked out like as an adult, like
That's
finally
that's
escaped her
insane.
captors, and there's like books and everything. Like, and I'm like, that happened in my hometown. Like,
Yeah.
we all went to the same schools and everything, and like this is. I'm like that kind of stuff. There's no way I'm gonna be the last person who saw this person.
No.
Yeah,
And
like
it's fun to like get these stories and joke about it on a podcast when I read them, and it's like, oh, they found the kid, great, but like, dude, like you dodged a bullet. The biggest one this has happened multiple times that I've read stories is they lose the special needs kid, and
oh
the conversation wasn't as intense as the one you had the military dad, but it's like you had to not beg but really reassure those parents that like, no, like this kid, like it's his first outing, we're gonna have an eye on him, like we're gonna be totally fine. And that's the kid you lose. Like this is a parent
yeah,
you went over above and beyond to make sure they were gonna be safe, and then you lose that one. Man, I don't know what to tell you.
yeah. That kind of stuff is, I don't know, just anything with kid safety or and that kind of thing. I just think like, man, why aren't you guys where you're supposed to be? Or if something happens, like, like you never know, like the time that you guys go play hooky and we're all at the convention or whatever, and you guys played hooky and took off with your group without telling anybody in the
Mm-hmm.
middle of the night, and you're not in the hotel room, and then somebody calls in a bomb threat or like there's a fire
Yeah.
and we're trying to get a
Uh-huh.
hold, and they're checking names and looking at people coming out, and
You're still
everyone's
in there.
freaking out, yeah, looking for you, and
Yeah.
y'all are down at Carl's Jr. 24-hour burger deal or something. Like, why were you not where you supposed to? Why did you tell
Yeah.
somebody? Like that kind of stuff, just basic. Like we need to know so we know where people
Yeah.
are, and that
Over
was
communication.
yeah
100%.
over communication. So what's man, there's so much good stuff from your podcast, but we've been chatting for a minute. So just real quick, my question is, what's the craziest one that you personally have experienced? As you share all these crazy stories.
Yeah, let me think for a second because there's some really good ones and I always like forget about them. But I think the craziest story, this was like really early that I
Mm,
read this. Um they were on a trip in a
mm,
couple of 15 passenger vans with kids in Washington D.C., and one of the kids got the bright idea to write on a piece of paper something along the lines of like, help me or we're being
Yeah.
kidnapped.
Right.
And they put it up against the glass window. Youth pastor had no idea. He's
Mm.
just driving along in DC, which you don't play games in DC. Soon enough, there were like, I might butcher the story. You'll have to go back and listen.
Yeah.
3 or 4 black SUVs pull this caravan over, right? The 2 or 3. They yank the youth pastor out of the van at gunpoint, have him on the ground, and they're slowly like escorting the kids out of the back of the van.
Oh my
They start
gosh.
calling parents. They're like, hey, do you feel endangered? Like all this stuff. Youth pastor still has no idea what's going on. Took him like 2 or 3 hours to get it all sorted out. But that one is, I think that will always just be ingrained in my memory. And
The day I
like
got my
poor
youth pastor put on a watch list, like
literally, poor guy did nothing wrong. It was some punk kid in the back that ended up
yeah.
nearly getting him shot.
So that is, yeah, that one. I've heard of. I've seen people share that kind of stuff and been like, you know, we had all these people honking at us in the van, and then like look back and, you know, like come to find out like, no, my kid is in the, you know, third row of the van with this help me sign, you know, in the back. Like, are you kidding me right now? But so what for you personally in youth ministry, did you ever have any crazy experiences like that where something or have you like shared them and been like, I'm not telling anybody, but this one's actually mine?
So as I was like creating this podcast, I'm like, man, I've spent a lot of time in youth ministry. I grew up at a youth camp
Yeah.
for 13, 14 years. Like I have to have stories. I couldn't remember any, but as I was recording, some things started to come back into memory. The biggest one for me wasn't in youth ministry. It was when we were working at the camp as I was a teenager. We brought there was this inner city African-American group that came in, right? And the reason I say the culture is because they don't like the woods and they'll tell you that.
Right.
All right. So one of the things that the leader of the group, this is out in the boonies, this camp is, right? One of the things the leader of the group said was like, I want you to take these kids on a night hike and scare the living crap out of them. Like, I give you my permission. So me, my brother, and my 2 buddies are like, oh, bet. Like, we're going to go like have some fun. So we spent the afternoon preparing for this night hike. We scoped out like what trail we're going to bring down. It's going to last probably 35, 45 minutes. And this is going to be at midnight that evening. And we go out to the woods and we take knives. We start carving slash marks in trees, like massive slash marks. So we're going to stop here. We start putting, we put like a little speaker in the woods, like a Bluetooth speaker to screech. We had one kid out there in the woods, under like a bush or like a little tree right at the very end that he was going to start shaking it. So fast forward to that evening, we have probably 50 inner city kids out in the woods, leaders too. Like there's some adults, and it's dark, so like everything's heightened, right? They're already like, this has been the topic of camp for the week. Like they can't wait for the night hike. So they're like really on edge already. So we take them out, and we knew where all the stuff was in the woods. So the first one is like, whoa, we hold up our hand like this, right? And you just hear flashlights start flashing around the woods. And we're just like, this is fresh. And it's this huge gash mark in the tree. And my brother and I are leading the hike, and we're just like, we start to like pretend to be nervous, right? So like we have to get scared. So the hike continues, and another buddy was in the woods. He starts chucking like boulders down the hill. So you hear stuff crashing through and you just see the flashlight whip around, like 50 kids like thinking they're gonna get eaten alive. Continue. So they're like freaked out at this point. We get to the end of the night hike, and this is probably 200, 300 yards at the bottom of the hill from like the dining hall where we're all going to meet. And there was this little creek, probably like 6 feet wide, that we had to cross. So people were like slowly going across. And my brother, he yells, he's like, wait, did you guys hear that? And then everyone looks, and this tree probably 15 feet away starts shaking. And the entire group sprints through this creek up the hill. And you just see leaders grabbing kids like by the shirts, yanking them up the hill. I'm pretty sure like someone had like an asthma attack and had an ambulance called. Like it was like next level insane. They thought they were going to they were out.
No, I just lost my camera. Hold on.
So basically the youth leaders were grabbing these kids by the shirts. And I just remember seeing them like hauling them up the hill. And there was like a girl pretty sure they had to call an ambulance because she had an asthma attack. Like, it was like next level. And the funniest thing is, like, we technically weren't liable because we had permission to do it all. But I think that's probably my craziest story from youth ministry.
So the thing in the tree was still one of your friends?
Oh yeah.
Doing
yeah.
it?
Like, we knew where he was going to be. And,
So
I mean, if I went on that hike, I would have been scared. If I didn't know, like,
yeah. So we're at, there's this place up in the mountains in Southern California where, there's a like denominational camp, you know, so it's where you go for summer camps, where you go for winter camps, where you go for leader retreats. And so all the college, you know, it's college retreat and everybody's up there, and the assistant youth pastor, he goes up and puts on this like really janky bear suit, and he goes up the hill from the forest, and he's like coming down, and all the girls are like, you know, and he's coming down, he's like, yeah, roar, you know, like he's like, this is so funny, they all think I'm a bear. They're like, oh my gosh, there's a bear, there's a bear. And they're like, who is that? Who is that? Jeff, there's a bear. There's a bear 20 feet past our buddy.
Oh my goodness.
Right on the hill. He doesn't
like,
see it.
The real bear's like, who's this? Oh yeah.
So yeah, just like I was waiting for that. Like, yeah, then we're like right by the thing, and there's a bear
like
at the door.
Bear.
You know,
there probably was. I don't want to know the creatures out there that were watching us that night, but I am sure we were not alone.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's so good. All right, so one last serious ish question before going. In all of that time, not funny, hilarious things, but what is, because like part of what sparked the idea for this, for my podcast was, you know, stories and things, but just looking at how following Jesus, you know, it's be rad for Jesus. Following Jesus is radically different and radically awesome. And so what's the most like awesome God moment you've seen or experienced all those years at camp, or, you know, maybe it's just personal devotion, but like, where's one of those things where you're just like, man, I have, you know, like the kind of thing where you read about in Acts where John and Peter are like, you know, they're getting whipped, they're in jail, and they're like, you have to stop talking about Jesus. And they're like, yeah, you do what you want. We can't help but speak of the things we've seen and heard. And so like, what's your biggest radical God moment?
So for me, I think it has to be a couple physical healings. And one was recent, and it was so really important to me is like being athletic, playing sports and stuff. And we have a church softball team I was coaching this year, and I haven't played softball since high school. I mean, I played a couple years, but nothing intense, right? And I really was feeling some pain in my arm, and I knew it was like probably like a little slight tear in my elbow. And what was really scaring me is like Tommy John. I'm like, I'm not a pro baseball player. Like, I'm not going to go get surgery for this. And like, it was important to me to be healthy and not have pain and make something worse. And we were having a special service at our church, and they were praying for healing, and they didn't even have to lay hands. The preacher was right there. He was like, you know what, if you have pain in your body, you know, the Holy Spirit's here right now. Like we're going to have healings tonight. And I was just like, you know what, it's been a while since I've really had a physical healing. I don't really get hurt often, but like, this is something I know I feel the pain. Like I move my elbow and there's a twinge, and I know it's not good just from like playing sports my whole life. Yeah. And that night he prayed. I was like, man, I started stretching my arm. I was playing guitar, actually. It's funny. Yeah. People probably saw it, but I started moving my arm, 100% healed since then. And it wasn't like, you know, like a bone grew back or anything like that, but it was just something that I'm like, man, I knew that was God in the moment. The other time was actually at our camp. We had our church come down, and they were doing like just a youth camp service. And I had been throwing my back out pretty severely, just doing little things. Yeah. And I know exactly where the pain is, and got prayer, instantly healed. Actually, I wouldn't say, I don't know if I was instantly healed, but I have never had that pain again. I wasn't in pain in the moment, but I knew like, hey, this is trouble I have. I don't know if like something got realigned. I knew that in the moment, it's like, oh, okay, I felt something happening. Yeah. And have not had that back pain in that spot, dude, ever since. That was 5-6 years ago, which is incredible. That's awesome. Yeah. And back pain's no joke. I used to kind of scoff at it. I remember a guy that worked at a church we were at, you know, had back pain, and he threw out his back, and he like laid down in the street next to his car. Like he was getting out of his car, and it went out, and he just like laid down. He's like, I can't do anything else. Yeah.
and somebody found him laying in the road, like, you know, and I was like, what a wuss, just freaking get up already, you know, like what
That's
a
how I
stupid
talk
thing.
too.
Like, why are you being such a baby? And then I threw out my back, like tying my shoe. And I was like laid out on the couch for like a week, just like, I can't breathe. Like, why does this hurt so bad? And I'm like, it's not even near my lungs. It's like lower back, like right above my hips. But I was like, everything, breathing hurts, looking hurts, talking hurts, like living.
Can't move,
like
nothing.
I can feel my heartbeat in my spine. This is horrible. But so, yeah, dude, that's awesome. And what an amazing and radical God we serve and know, who, you know, can make stuff like that happen easy.
The simplest, and even like the elbow pain. It's like, you know, someone might look at that and be like, oh, it's like a little bit of elbow pain. I don't lie. Like I'm not gonna sit on here and, you know, do this for the sake of clout. Like I really have not had pain since that day. And the back,
that's awesome.
Like that's an incredible testimony itself. So
yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Like you know, God, when you see that stuff happen in Scripture, God uses that as ways to, you know, Jesus is establishing his authority. People are being reassured that God really sees them and is doing something. It's a testimony of the greatness of God. And so those are absolutely, you know, amazing things that we should speak of, the incredible, awesome power of our God. So, dude, thanks for sharing that with us. And thanks for being here on the podcast. This has been a lot of fun. I feel like I could just sit and hear stories like this and talk about it for hours on end. But I really appreciate your podcast. If people wanted to check out all of these things, any and all the things you want to plug, social media, your podcasts and whatnot, where can people find you?
The best place to look, and it will kind of lead to all the others, would be either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Just search Youth Group Chronicles. From there, that's our long form podcast audio. Eventually, we're working on it right now, getting a YouTube channel rolling. It's a lot of work, but it's coming. So you'll get to see all the crazy faces for an entire episode instead of a TikTok clip. And then you can just, on TikTok, I post to my personal page, Sam T. Moss. And then on Instagram, we post some reels on there. And that's just Youth Group Chronicles. So those three places are where you'll find the good stuff.
Is it Youth Group Chronicles or at YG Chronicles on Insta?
You're right. Yes, it is YG Chronicles.
Okay. I'm just thinking, I could literally, I could hear your voice from the podcast going at YG Chronicles.
You're right. You can tell it's been a while since I sat down and recorded some episodes. So
YG
Chronicles for Instagram, and then it's just my personal page on TikTok.
Yeah, no, it's all good, man. And I got to say, I didn't call you out, but a couple episodes ago on my podcast, I put you on blast gently, but I just, because the way you guys talk about your merch, because you were like, some people, they just throw their logo on the merch. And I was like, dude, I love the name of our podcast. Like it's a thing I say to people.
Yours is awesome. I love that.
And so like, I put, you know, but that I like, it was literally like, as I was putting the merch together, I was listening to your podcast and I'm getting the shirts loaded into a store that all say "Be Rad for Jesus." You know, some people just put the name of their podcast on the thing. We didn't do that. We put like things that you can wear anywhere. And I'm like, this is the thing I want people to wear. So
you're the exception to the rule. When I was looking at it, I'm like, it goes both ways, so it works.
No, for sure, it does. And yeah, some of the stuff, like I'm like, I would never wear a shirt with like that podcast name where it's just like blah 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 podcast. Like, who cares? But
you know
what
really came to mind? It wasn't even like Christian podcast. It was because of my professional career. It's these tech companies will like throw their logos on this merch that they like send to customers. And they'll send them like a t-shirt of like the SaaS tool you use or the software you use. And it's like, when would I ever wear this? Like, this is the most pointless customer gift ever. So that's actually where I got it from. That's funny. You're the exception to the rule, don't worry.
No, it's all good, dude. I will say though, the best web design, because I do web and graphic design too, but like probably not as cool. So, but there was a WordPress development company out there for a while called Flywheel, and like back in the day, and they sent out shirts. If you signed up with them for, I didn't even like pay for something. I don't know why, like what I did to get the t-shirt, but they sent me a package with a bunch of marketing stuff. And one of them is a shirt that I still wear. I've had it for probably 15 years. And it says "Designers are fly." And like says it all cool. Huge. And then on the back, it just has their little Flywheel logo, like real small, centered in the shoulders. And I'm like, that is the best freaking like random marketing shirt ever. Cause I'm like, heck yeah, they are. Look, I'm fly. And it just says fly. Like that's the biggest part. It's like huge kind of chalk cursive letters. And I'm like, that was one of my favorite shirts when I could fit into it. I've grown since then. But anyway, man.
Dad life, right?
Yeah. Hashtag dad life. Don't fit. Wearing a different size than I used to. Well, and at the time I was into like the hardcore band, like wearing the medium, you gotta
the tight, like the tight shirts.
Yeah. The overly small, like looking at guys with like a gut, like twice as big as me going like, yeah, just give me a small. I'm like, you don't wear small, bro. But anyway, dude, Sam, thanks so much for being on here, man. I'd love to do this again sometime when you get some more crazy stories under your belt.
Hit me up whenever you want.
Yeah, man. I'll look forward to hearing the next episodes of YG Chronicles because it is a dope podcast and definitely encouragement and just fun to listen to and laugh at the hilarity that ensues. So
absolutely, man. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate you having me. Thank you.